What's up, everybody? Maine Fly Guys here with continuing our tutorial. I don't know what episode this is, but this is a Stonefly Nymph. And here I have a size 8 fire hole, and these are also fire hole beads. The back one is 3/16, and the front one is 5/32, so the front one is just a little smaller. So I start my thread right in the middle of the body. This is kind of a signal as to where that's how much space I want to have for the front. So it's just sort of a signal for me, because usually I don't start right in the middle, but for this one I do. Alright, so I go well into the bend of the hook, and this is a golden stone, so I grab a little yellow dubbing, just a wee little bit. Alright, I just make a little dubbing ball. Then what I do is I come in with 2 biots. These are brown. These are sort of the browner biots. Come in with these. And you want the tails to be about as long as the body. So that white thread part, you want these tails to be about that length. Come in, boom, that looks good. Pinch them down with my left, and then I'll just wrap forward, catching the ends here. Now I'm going to look at my tails, and they're in pretty good shape, but you can adjust them. And so there, I've made my adjustment. They're sitting a little bit more even now. And you can fiddle around with these as much as you'd like to get them where you want to be really even. But I don't think it's too big of a deal. I don't think the fish particularly are really concerned with what your biots look like. Okay, so once you get those tied in, you're gonna take some gold wire and you're gonna start putting that in. The gold wire is going to be your body, or segments on your body. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tie it in on the very side. I'm gonna tie it in on the side, almost the bottom. And I'm gonna continue backwards. I'm gonna pull these tips back and catch them. They will only add to the front. This will sort of be a natural taper, if you will. Okay, and then I'm going to work all the way back to right where I tied my tails in. You don't want to go too far back because you don't want to pinch the tails too much. That's good right there. Okay, so once you have that tied in, you're going to come in, and this is vinyl medium, size medium. This is like a darker brown to match that golden stonefly sort of color. You'll have to excuse me if I don't sound great, because I am on the mend from a sickness. Not COVID, just a regular cold. Would you believe it? Okay, so I tie that in. Nice and steady, and you'll see there's a tiny taper, really tiny. Stoneflies don't have much of a taper. But what I do is I come in with yellow Sharpie. And it has to be yellow Sharpie, it can't be anything else. And that's why I use the white thread, so I can color it yellow. I'll show you why it has to be yellow Sharpie. I don't know if you can see that. Let me see if I can do this. Aha, there we go. So it's UV. Now you see how it's very bright? That means it gives off sort of a UV spot. So underneath, as we wrap our body here, underneath there is a UV glow, which stoneflies can have. They can have sort of a UV iridescence to them, so just kind of matching the hatch even further. Once you get to that point, lock it in with a few figure eights. Boom. And then we can trim it, get out of the way. Then our wire will go neatly into the slots, and you'll see it makes this nice gold brown, kind of a complex body, which stoneflies typically have. Okay. So now you don't want to make this little section in the middle here too big, because then your bead won't be able to slide really back. You want it to go back a little bit. So just be careful not to build up too much. Okay, so from here, if I could find my little leggies here, we're going to add in some rubber legs. These are my favorite to use. They're like a brown black, and they're cylindrical. So if you put the legs longer than the bend of the hook, what will happen is they'll get caught underneath like this. So you need to stop them pretty much. You need to have them stopped at, or cut them at the come on, bend of the hook. There we go. Okay. If you're worried about your legs sliding around at this moment, you can use super glue and cut and glue them in right on top, which I frequently do. So the final, or the next part, is I take some gray dubbing. Sometimes I'll take gray squirrel, but here I just have sort of gray, and we're going to build up a thorax, the beginning of a thorax, I should say. Why I use gray, I have no idea. Sometimes I use yellow, sometimes I use brown. I don't really have a rhyme or reason. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just put a few drops of super glue on my thread. Just a few. And I'm going to wrap it right tight. This should keep everything sort of together, stop it from falling apart. And then I'll do one final wrap of my dubbing there, and then I'll just do sort of a hitch, lock that in, cut it, and if there's not enough, I'll take my super glue and I'll just put a drop in there, and then what I'll do is I'll push that bead back and I'll just hold it in place. Anything like this stuff here, all this stuff that's happening on top here, all that stuff is pretty much going to be covered up, so don't worry too much. Although this looks pretty great, but you don't need to worry too much about it. Okay, so now what we do is we start building this up just a little bit, just to make sure it's almost a lock to keep this gold bead in place. You know what I'm saying? Excuse me. And so now what we're going to do is I'm going to come in with a rubber leg again. Tie one in on each side. Ooh. Tie one in on each side. Come on. There we go. Again, these can be slippery, so I kind of go in behind and out front of them. And again, you can make them as long or as short as you want, it doesn't really matter. Whatever your preference is. And then, what I'm going to do is make a dubbing loop. So I'm going to make a dubbing loop. It's not going to be a whole lot of material, so don't worry if it's kind of smaller. And I definitely use a brown dubbing here every time. I have been using this a lot. It's just like very stringy. It's called Hare's Ear Plus. So it's like a hare's ear, and then there's some other long stringy fibers in there. And I really enjoy it. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start slipping some of this dubbing into my dubbing loop. And you don't need a whole lot because you know you don't have a whole lot of room to work with, but you don't want to shortchange yourself, because this is it has to be enough to cover up this bead out back here. So once you've got it, I usually flip it upside down so I don't get my legs caught. Give your dubbing loop a few twists. Good. Great. And then I usually brush it out just to give it that extra buggy look. Get all those loose fibers out now. Okay. And then I'm gonna sort of hold the legs back as I go forward so that my material kind of is all facing the same direction and it's not pushing those legs back. Great. That looks great. So you see, I might actually lower this a little bit so that you guys can see. So you see we have this very buggy looking thorax, almost sort of gill-like, and I go right to the front, and as soon as I can't go any further, I'll trap it down twice, do a really solid pinch to make sure it's not going anywhere, and then trim the excess off. Now from here you can still brush it out some. You'll see in spots where it might be bare, but just spend a little time brushing it out and that looks great. Okay, so that's great. So then our next part is we're gonna come in. This is a partridge feather from the back of a partridge. I don't use these feathers very often, but you can come in, take the tip of the feather, tie in the tip of the feather. So now you have all the good stuff out back. Just a couple times. Use hackle pliers because the feathers from the back are soft, like soft, I don't know. They break easily. So if you're trying to use your fingers, you'll probably snap. So you should only get 1 or 2 wraps, that's it. So we're gonna go, and don't worry about if it looks terrible, because we'll be able to fix it. Okay, so I got 1.5 wraps. I'm just gonna use my finger to hold it down, catch the tip there. Great. So do you see it's a much fuller now? Do you see how much that body just became much fuller, much more buggy? And so our final step is we're going to take some thin skin and we're going to lay it right on top and make a casing for this bug. And the tip of it should extend just past the gold bead. It should extend just past the gold bead. Trap it down. So you have something like that. There, I'll work it like this. Then I come in and I color my thread with the yellow Sharpie again. Okay. So I will flip over, keeping pressure on your thread, I'll flip this over and catch it right on top like that. Then I'll just do a few a few wraps to just keep it in place. And I cannot find for the life of me. Aha, I got it. Okay. And after that, I will just come in with a whip finish and do a few whip finishes. Cinch it down pretty tight. You can't use super glue with the Sharpie because it will turn red. Little chemical reaction. So I just cut that off. Now there are two. You see how it's kind of a sort of like there are separate stages to the casing, and that is the same on all Stoneflies. Then I'm going to come in and just add a little UV for some added protection. Let that thaw in. Ooh. There, just put a little teeny tiny casing. See that little casing there? Boom, hit it with the UV for 10 seconds. You'll see, if I can do it, you'll see this whole fly basically lights up. I mean, the body's got UV. There's a UV hotspot up front now. UV all over the place. See how, like, here, let me get a pointer. See when I hit the tails here? See how they don't shine? They're just sort of dull, that dull purple or brown. But here, this body, it shines really bright. It's like white almost. That means it's got UV. Same thing here, when I put it on the feathers don't shine really, but this is like white. This, because I put, because I colored it with yellow Sharpie. So, little known fact, yellow Sharpie gives off UV. And so there it is. There is your Stonefly Nymph. And this is like my favorite pattern for obvious reasons. And I'd say this. They hatch in like July, even August. And so in the months between May and July, you want to use the big boys. Like this one, this is a size 8, maybe even a size 6 or size 4. But after they hatch, there's not many big boys in the system. So you will want to go down a size. So maybe you start using the size 10s and 12s in September, because fish won't be seeing any of the big boys for the rest of the year. So, all right, that's it. That's the Nymph, and we will be moving on to an emerger, which very, very few people use, but I use some, and I think people are missing out who don't use it. So, thanks for chiming in. I'm probably gonna go to sleep right now because I need some rest, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. See ya.